We are entering a new golden era of fighting games. For the first time in a long time, if ever, we're getting a new Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Tekken game within 8 months of each other. That is insane. Once January hits by, Tekken 8 will officially be out, and the big three will each have a new game in the new generation. And honestly, it's very exciting as each of these games brings something new and fresh to the genre with unique twist on classics. Honestly, we're in the best time to be a FGC player, as there's so many other games outside of the big three that are flourishing right now. You have the Smash Bros community with Super Smash Bros Ultimate, one of the greatest games of all time. You have King of Fighters and Guilty Gear Strive still getting updated, and eventually rollback is going to Dragon Ball FighterZ. Honestly, at this point, not sure what's coming first, that or Jesus Christ himself. By the time rollback comes out for Dragon Ball FighterZ, the trumpets might be blowing and we all might be in for the rapture and judgment day. But all jokes aside, the reason this is honestly a new golden era of fighting games is because there's so many options out there that there's something for everyone. These aren't just some sequels to classic franchises, they're hailed as some of the best fighting games ever to come out. Although they're not perfect by any means, they're still extremely fun in their own ways. Let's take a look at Street Fighter 6, a game that saved a franchise. For a better part of the decade, Street Fighter was looked down upon and was far away from their glory days when it first came out, or even from Street Fighter 4. Although it was a pretty solid game by the end of its life cycle, we cannot ignore the way it began. It was one of the worst fighting games ever with the lack of content and just the way they presented the game. It was honestly a slap in the face to many fans. I'm not saying the game is bad in no way. Many fans still felt burnt, and it was just another disaster in a long line of disappointments throughout the decade. The 2010s were not great years for Capcom, who were going through their crapcom era, delivering disappointment after disappointment. Although Marvel vs. Capcom 3 did stand the test of time and is currently thriving due to the community and the modding going on right now, and honestly it's considered one of the greatest fighting games of all time. But we still can't ignore the odd choices Capcom made with their other games such as Street Fighter X Tekken, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, and releasing Ultimate version of Marvel vs. Capcom 3 just 6 months after the initial release, which was nuts. Then we get Street Fighter 5, which had an abysmal launch. I don't need to go through it, as if you were around this time, you know just how bad it was. Again, it did turn out to be a pretty good game. And then we get Street Fighter 6, the long-awaited sequel, and it delivered on every aspect. Great online, great multiplayer, a lot of content. They even tried their own little story mode. Although it's not the best, it was still something, and honestly, it's still pretty fun. And honestly, the only downside of this game is the roster. It's not the greatest, but it will eventually get there as they continue to support the game throughout the years, and we all know the game's gonna bang once Akuma comes around. It honestly turned out to be one of the best Street Fighter games in the entire franchise, and I'm so glad that Capcom has finally come back to their senses and the redemption arc is finally complete. Hopefully they can start looking at and focusing on some of the side games such as Darkstalkers, but looking at it now, that might not be the case. But regardless, I'm still happy with where Capcom is now. Mortal Kombat, on the other hand, was going through the exact opposite in the 2010s, as they were going through their boom period. They went through their fall of grace in the 2000s through the 3D era, which wasn't necessarily bad in my opinion. We got some pretty interesting games like Deception and Deadly Alliance. Shaolin Monks was amazing, but we can't deny that the franchise wasn't as great as it used to be. I like the games. They tried a lot of things like chess combat, puzzle combat. Some of the mini games were really fun. The fatalities were very interesting, but it wasn't as great as they could be. And the nail in the coffin was DC versus MK, a diabolical game that I have no idea how it even came about. That game is bad. It threw everything that made Mortal Kombat in service for the DC heroes and was more like a children's game to a lot of people. I thought it was okay at the time, but I definitely understand the grievances of this horrendous game, and thus something had to change. Boom, Mortal Kombat 9, the game that changed everything and saved the franchise, and is the reason why Mortal Kombat is the way it is now, completely rebooting the game and delivering the greatest story in fighting game history. Fighting games are not known for their stories. They're pretty slapped together and just all pure nonsense, but this one was different. It was cinematic. The way it flowed and structured was never before seen and was such a hit that NetherRealm still uses this formula to this day. And then they came with another banger, rectifying their mistake, this time making DC their own little franchise with Injustice, which delivered an impactful, iconic, and honestly one of the greatest DC stories of all time. It made so many dreams come true, and although the games ended up becoming Zoner the game, I still love that franchise very deeply. And because of the success of these two franchises, NetherRealm is now known as the best story-driven fighting game in the entire industry, and honestly, one of the best story-driven games ever made. Of course, none of the stories are perfect, there's a lot of flaws in them, but it's much better than what we used to get previously in other fighting games. And then we have Mortal Kombat 1, which I deeply love. It's one of my favorite games in the franchise gameplay-wise in a very long time, with the assist adding a lot more oomph to the game. It does come with a lot of controversy. A lot of people are not happy with the lack of content compared to Mortal Kombat 11 and just the way the multiplayer is functioning. Right now, these are all problems, but eventually I think they'll figure it out and it will become one of the best fighting games of all time. If Street Fighter V could save itself, I think Mortal Kombat could do as well. And then we have Tekken. Tekken 7 has been dominating the fighting game industry for a better half of a decade, and with no surprise, because it's honestly one of the most spectacular looking fighting games ever made. Just watching the fights and the gameplay is truly magnificent, honestly makes some of the best tournament moments in all of FGC. Especially with the inclusion of Akuma, which was never before seen, and honestly one of the greatest guest characters of all time, something Tekken 7 is known for. Obviously, their guest characters alongside Mortal Kombat, which has now been overrunning the fighting game community, with Street Fighter kind of lacking in that regard. Hopefully Street Fighter 6 does something crazy like that, maybe have like a Wolverine in their game. That'd be amazing. But anyways, Tekken came out the bag with so many surprisers such as Noctis, Negan from The Walking Dead. How did he get in the game? That was a crazy inclusion. And honestly, Tekken is now heralded as one of the greatest fighting games of all time. And 8 kind of looked similar to 7 at first glance, but man, it's packed full of so many gameplay changes. It's honestly kind of nerve-wracking because there's so much you need to remember and learn. Just playing the beta, the game is extremely fun, and even when I was losing, similar to Street Fighter 6, I was still having a great time. It's the perfect example of what a great fighting game looks like. Jam-packed of content, a story mode, so many characters, the roster's touching I think 32, that's insane off the rip. Cool characters, great gameplay, and solid online. It could do a lot better, not gonna lie, but hopefully they make it better with rollback and all that other stuff. But honestly, it's shaping up to be one of the best fighting games in the franchise, and I cannot wait to see how that all unfolds. Again, there's so many games out right now to choose from, and the fighting game is honestly flourishing in their community with Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, King of Fighters, Tekken, Guilty Gear Strives, Dragon Ball Z Fighters, Smash Bros Ultimate, Nick All-Star Brawl 2. Like, there's so much cool stuff out right now. There's a game for everyone. Brawlhalla, Skullgirls. It's what a time to be alive is all I can say. I cannot wait to see how Tekken 8 comes out and just what the future of fighting games is gonna look like. Otherwise, hope you guys have a good day and a good night. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.